So welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today, I'm joined by Miriam Simon. You're very welcome to the podcast, Miriam. And I want to begin, like I normally do, by asking you to introduce yourself, a little bit about who you are, what you do, a little bit about your journey to our worldwide audience today. So Miriam, thanks for being on the Global Discussion. Over to you.
Well, thank you for having me, Simon. I'm delighted to be here. Yes, I am Miriam Simon. Probably I'm most well known for retail and retail analysis. I've over 3 decades experience in the retail field. I'm a real commercial trader would be the way I would describe. But I do a lot of work really cross-industry, would you believe? I do a lot of work in retail, helping people with commercial trading strategy, all sizes of business, from small businesses up to businesses that take hundreds of millions. I also work in quite a lot of large corporate structures, helping at C-level with executive development and leadership development. So I'm a little bit of a nerd. I'm quite cross-industry. I've worked in everything from aeronautics to med tech to but retail is really my passion, and my work portfolio, I purposely keep very cross-category because it makes me of more value to everybody. And I'll probably talk more about that as we talk. But I believe in lifelong learning and on having multiple perspectives. And I think that has great commercial value add as well. That was a bit waffly, wasn't it?
Well, I think it's good because I'm interested that our audience understand where you're coming from. So it's actually a great summary. And I'm going to ask you some questions about retail in a minute because it's a particular interesting area for me.
Yeah.
But I do like the fact that you mentioned, like, whether it's pharma or med tech, and I know you've done some work in IT, and the fact that you work with a lot of these sort of C-suites that you mention, global brands that you mention, and companies, of different shapes and sizes, to be honest. And you do like that because it gives you that sort of wider view. And you've got 3 decades of experience, which is exceptionally valuable to these brands and to the executives of these companies. But could I ask you a couple of quick questions just on the retail? Because I know that's a particular sweet spot and a particular area of expertise.
Yeah.
And it's an obvious question, but I'm interested in, from an expert's perspective. Retail in particular and retailing has gone through probably something that I wouldn't have ever imagined happening, the pandemic, right? The obvious. Yeah. And I saw so much business having to pivot, move, whatever you want to call it, dramatically, not to help increase profits or to deliver more value to the bottom line, or because their customers demand it. They had no choice. They had to do it to survive in a lot of cases, particularly smaller retailers. And when I think about, small local retail, a lot of those found it extremely hard, and governments were late in terms of putting financial support structures in place, etc. But even some of the world's biggest brands, when it comes to retailing or e-commerce strategies, they weren't as far along this sort of digital journey as they thought they were, and they really got caught out. So as somebody who's got all this experience, what's your take on the years that we've just been through and where we're at now?
I think pandemic aside, it's been absolutely bloody fantastic, and so I've quite a strange view on this, because I believe that all business is retail. So it doesn't matter what you're selling, whether you're selling a service or it doesn't matter what you're selling, whether you're selling insurance, it's retail. If you're transacting, it's retail. So first of all, I would say retail is the most underrated business commercial pillar, because we're all retailers, anybody in business. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, from somebody who is one of the I find it really fascinating. I'm sort of an observer of life, and I sort of am one of these people that looks to join the dots. And retail gives us the cleanest the cleanest view on changing human behavior. So as we are evolving and changing as humans, retail is where we see that first. So retail is at the cutting edge. I am totally biased, by the way, but retail is at the cutting edge of human behavior and on how we're developing and evolving as a human species. I would say that what we saw in the pandemic was bloody fascinating, because what we saw was a complete flip in the balance of power. So before, you had a few really big multinationals who had all the money and all the power and all the buying power, and they called the shots. And the small guy, it was really hard for them to take money and to compete. But what happened in the pandemic was it just completely turned on its head, because if it didn't matter whether you'd only been in business for a week, if you were able to think on your feet and react to what the consumer, as in all of us, needed at that moment, you had the advantage. And the difference here is, if you're, and this is where we saw so many, and I'll try not to mention company names, this is why we saw so many really big names. They just disappeared because they were so big, their infrastructure was so heavy, they were not able to innovate because there were too many stakeholders that had to be engaged with. Whereas the small guys were able to go, do you know, sugar honey iced tea, let's just go for it, because it's either that or we go tits up, so to speak. So there was an element of the whole balance of power completely switched. And do you know, for every business that had a really bad time, there were lots of businesses that have had a really good time. And they will tell you that the pandemic was the best thing that ever happened to them, because it forced them. Retailers tend to, particularly the smaller guys, tend to be, you know, if you're an independent retailer or you've got, say, less than a dozen stores, you tend to be, I do everything. I'm marketing, I'm IT. If there even is an IT, I do the buying. I might even be the person who tidies up the stockroom and sweeps the floor. And what the pandemic did was it forced people to get digital, whether they liked it or not. And what we saw businesses have like fantastic growth during the pandemic. We saw really small businesses venture into multi-channel retail. They didn't just get a website. They were, you know, doing lives because what is it they say? Necessity is the mother of all invention. So those that were agile and a bit nimble on their feet, and actually during the pandemic, it's a bit dated now, but during the pandemic I wrote a book about it, because there were so many examples of small businesses who absolutely thrived. They might have had closed doors for 6 or 7 months of 2020, but they doubled their turnover, which is amazing when you think about it.
It's incredible, Miriam. And you've raised some excellent points there, because you know, my initial, when I started talking about that with you, you know, I was thinking more about the downsides and the change and the turmoil. But you're right. There's actually, when I look at the business results from some particular sectors, they actually skyrocketed during the pandemic. Now, I know things like travel was impacted significantly, and that really struggled.
It really was.
Thinking, you know, at a local level, you couldn't go into a hairdresser's, or you couldn't go into a restaurant or a bar, you know, and that they struggled. But there were other companies that pivoted very fast. And I think you used a great word there, the agile business, the people that were agile, the agility. If they could transform quickly and they were nimble enough and smart enough to put it in place, they did benefit, and lots of companies did.
They did. And, you know, I would say, like, it's really easy, you know, for us to say, no matter, it was a crisis situation. Do you know, we all thought we were going to drop dead at any second. We couldn't move more than a kilometre from our house. That feels like such a long time ago now, but it was very frightening at the time. And what I will say is, in Ireland, I actually thought some of the government strategy was very clever, because they put all the money into digital. And so they said, go get yourself, if you're a big business, here's a big lump of money, get yourself sorted quickly. If you're a small business, here's a smaller lump of money, get yourself sorted quickly. So to be fair, I actually think, flying my Irish flag here, I actually think we responded pretty well as a nation. There were, I think, I'm trying to remember what they call them. They had proper commercial vouchers that were put out to help people with how to pivot. So there was immediate help, almost immediate help put out for everybody to get digital. And there, even the ones that were reluctant, you know, I remember there were businesses that I spoke to in April and May. I did a lot of talks with groups of retailers in that first 4 or 5 months, and there, you know, I'd be saying to them, you need to do this, and they would go, oh, I'll do all of that, but do you know what, a website isn't for me. And these are the same businesses that 6 months later had a really good website, and it's given them triple-digit growth year on year since. So even those that were still reluctant as the sugar honey iced tea hit the fan, most of them did jump on board, because, you know, sometimes sometimes it is a shock like that that makes you innovate, and it makes you change your approach, you know.
Well, that's a great view. And you mentioned your book, and I know back in March 2021, I think it was, you wrote a book, didn't you? Retailing Through Uncertainty. And in that book, you talked about how it's actually a time for you to thrive, and how it's actually and that I think was a very important message at the right time.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? No matter what is going on, there's always opportunity. So you know, there's the nature of the world we live in is there's always going to be a crisis of some sort. You know, I remember being a kid, and it was the whole, you know, Cold War was going on, and and then I remember being a bit older and us all receiving our iodine tablets because of Sellafield, and you know, we might all die at any second, and you know, there's always a crisis, and there's always some level of something to be afraid of. But no matter what it is, there's always going to be opportunity. No matter, you know, in 2008 when everything crashed, there were a lot of people who did very well, because instead of focusing on the they were looking at, right, okay, how can I help? Where's the opportunity here? And most things go back to human behavior. You know, if you think about business is about humans, and it's about human behavior, and it's about what do people need. And if you service what people need, you'll be busy. It's as simple as that.
I couldn't agree more. And Miriam, I want to ask you, before we move off this topic a little bit, because you were at senior levels in a lot of large organizations. You've been on the board of many of these companies, and I'm thinking of people like the Kingfisher Group, you know, B&Q, you know, big, huge, massive company, or Monsoon or TKMaxx or Lifestyle, those kind of companies.
Yeah.
And brands. But today, obviously, you're advising companies. You've wrote a book. You're involved in something for our audience may or may not be aware of, called the Retail Powerhouse back in 2020. As well as that, I know you've done some time with the Chambers of Commerce as a vice president. So what was the transition for you? Why did that transition occur? And what do you love about what you do now?
Well, do you know, I was told by lots of people that I should be in business myself for a very long time, and I was very reluctant. And I kind of was forced into business accidentally. I had a parent got very sick, and so I needed to be more available. And I'd always been in very senior roles that were all consuming, and I wasn't able to do that and care for a parent. So I kind of was a reluctant self-employed person, and but God, in hindsight, I should have listened to everybody and done it 10 years earlier, because I get to do a lot of stuff that I love. I get to work with people that I like, and I get to be multi-layered. So my business is multi-layered now. So I do. Just to go back to my corporate life, I was really lucky. I got to work with some brilliant retailers, and I got to learn from some of the best retailers, the likes of John Horner, Carl McPhail, Phil Wrigley, you know, Paul Clark. I got to work with some amazing retailers, and I'm somebody who's always been very hungry for knowledge and very hungry to learn, and I got something from every business. So the Dunnes, actually just really quickly, if you got to, so Dunnes Stores, I was a trainee manager. They beat a work ethic into me that I would not have had a career without. So I worked with them for a few years, and it was hard bloody graft, but they were proper, true commercial retailers. And then I had about 8 or 10 years in the Burton Group, and they educated me, and that was proper corporate retail. And they sort of identified me as talent and sort of really invested in me. And then I worked with River Island, which is a family business and one of the most commercial businesses. You've no idea, really commercial business. And then I went from them to Monsoon. Monsoon taught me how to engage and how to really lead people. They were fantastic at engagement. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is because everything you do, it gives you value, even if you don't see it when you're in it, if that makes sense. So I really learned how to empower and engage and really get a team behind you when I was with Monsoon. I really learned how to do that from a very skillful business at that. And then TKMaxx are categorically, operationally, one of the most amazing, clever business models on the planet. There's no reason, it's no surprise they're a Fortune 500 company. And then Lifestyle Sports, really visionary, really young, really energetic brand. B&Q, really solid, very good infrastructure organization. So every role I've had, actually, I got massive learning value out of, and was really lucky to work with some really exceptional people along the way. And going out in business on my own, the first year I kind of was just like completely lost, and it took me 6 or 8 months to get my act together. I had a fantastic mentor in that first year. I'm going to give him a plug, Shane Craddock, probably one of the best leadership coaches in the country, in my opinion. And I think I'm really good. I shouldn't say that. I know I'm good at my job, but he is exceptional. So, and he kicked my ass, and he forced me to value myself properly. I remember he made me, one of the first things he made me do was he made me, because I was coming from a place of low confidence, because I was grieving for a parent that was still alive, actually, at the time. And I was in this shock of, having to, because women get a rough deal. We have to look after the kids and the elders at the same time as earn the bacon. But so I was in this, like, sort of in a bit of a dizzy spell, and I didn't know what to do, and mistakenly thought, because I'm self-employed, I'm going right back to the beginning now. And he shook me out of that and made me realize, no, you're not. And actually, an exercise he made me do, which I'm going to share here because it's really high value, he made me go and monetize my CV. He made me go back through every year and put actual cash beside the growth, because I was always very results, and I was very good at making money for other people. So he made me go and monetize every single one of those roles, just to make me go, actually, I'm not starting from the beginning here. I need to take myself a little bit more seriously. So yeah, Shane Craddock, great leadership coach. So so I now am really lucky that I get to do a bit of lots of things. So I am on the panel for the European Innovation Council. So I get to see lots of new innovation that is coming through Europe, and you get to see the future a little bit ahead of when it comes, which is, for somebody like me, an absolute gift. It's absolutely fascinating. I get to do bits of work with big industries like Falsha, so you get to sort of touch on tourism. I get to work with lots of retailers. I have a really good base of retail clients that I work with. The retail powerhouse was grown out of absolute need. I was getting lots of phone calls from small businesses. So what happened was, I do a lot of talking. This might shock you. I do like to talk. So I would do lots of public speaking about the future of retail and what the key trends are. And I did a lot of, during the first year of the pandemic in particular, where we would get lots of towns of retailers together, and I would go, right, do this. These are the things to do to keep the money flowing. And as a result, I had all of these businesses were contacting me, and I was working 18, 20 hours a day, because you don't want to say no to somebody who is in need. And so I thought, no, I have to put some manners on this, or I'm going to end up burning out. So we set up the Retail Powerhouse, which was a low cost subscription group, which meant that instead of have the same conversation 50 times in a week, I could have it once for 1 hour. And the reason there was a low cost attached was so that it was valued by people, so that my time wasn't wasted. So there was a low fee attached to it, but that's still going now. There's still a core group of retailers, and it's actually become quite a powerful network of retailers that are really thriving, which is lovely to see. So I have that as well. And then I still put on the odd program. So I've one that I'm working on at the moment, which is called Retail Rockstar, which is really about being very resilient in this trading time. And it's a little bit of leadership as well as some commercial smarts on how to get the money in. I'm all about getting the money in, because if you're in retail, that's what you're there about, you know. So
I shall keep an eye and an ear out for the Retail Rockstar. That sounds very exciting.
But the important thing is I get to do lots of things. That's probably, I took too long to get to explain that point. And I think that's what makes me high value, because I get to do a lot of things, means I'm absorbing more information, which makes me better for everybody. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And as well as doing that activity today and having that sort of, I don't know whether I'd say multi-channel or multi-experience across multiple areas, you're also building on a solid results producing retail background, you know, a sort of traditional retail, if I can use that in inverted commas, if you know what I mean. Working with some of the biggest brands in the world, and you've talked about some of their operational excellence, some of their, you know, whether they're streets ahead in e-commerce or streets ahead in operations. And it's nice to hear somebody threading that journey, through all the different experience that they've learned along the way, and now how today you're still pulling in the relevant pieces and you're setting up your own community. I've been reading Mark Schaefer's book recently that he just launched about how community is the new, you know, it's the final step of marketing. And even from that Retail Powerhouse sort of group that you set up, how community becomes such an important element. So thanks for sharing those insights, Miriam. That's been a fascinating journey through your sort of expertise at sort of retail and trading. And I love the very first thing that you said, going back to one of the things that you said very early, is everybody's in retail, you know. And it's actually when you let that sentence drop, and when you think about that, you kind of go, yeah, we're all trying to trade something, you know, at some stage. So it's a very simple sort of quote, but it's actually very meaningful. And I would encourage anybody to go and have a look at what you wrote about thriving during uncertain times and difficult times. So thanks for sharing that. I want to change gear a little bit, if that's okay, Miriam.
Absolutely.
Because you were talking about all the ways that you take on information, and I wanted to ask you about how you actually onboard information. I want to ask you, do you read for pleasure? Do you get time? Do you read for business? Do you get time? What kind of things do you read? Are you an audiobook kind of person? Do you find you learn better by watching and observing? Or what's your learning style, and what kind of things do you like to sort of absorb?
So I'm probably a very active learner. I need to do something to learn. I'm quite an active learner. I do read. I don't read as much as I used to. I think in the last few years, I think we've all become a lot more distracted. So at any given time, I'll be reading about 6 or 7 books. So it would take a very compelling book to get me to finish it. The book of the pandemic for me actually was Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, which was all about the different perspectives. And I think that was probably one of the most powerful books I read. That I think I bought that book for about 30 different people in the year that followed as a gift. So Matthew Syed, you owe me. just to say.
Well, that's always a great recommendation. If when I find myself going out of my way and buying books just to give to people, I know it's a great book.
Yeah. So I do like to read. I probably don't read as much as I used to. I used to read voraciously. I have my front room is literally all books. But I'm not reading as much as I used to. Learning styles really interest me. I have a son at university, and I watch him, and he's watching something on YouTube and listening to something at the same time, or he'll read and listen at the same time, which I find quite curious. I'd rather listen and do at the same time, so I do listen to short podcasts. I'm not into waffle. I'm into get me to what I need. I'm a little bit of get me to what I need. There's some great short podcasts out there that are, jam-packed. I'm at that age of life. I'm not old, by the way, but I am at that age of life where I'm a little bit more conscious that I need to eat the apples. I need to, do the meditation, and then I need to get up in the morning and get active. So I'm probably in a little bit. Maybe it's because it's early in the year. I'm in that part of the year which is all about good living and clean living at the moment. It might last for another 5 minutes. We'll see. We'll see. But so a little bit of podcast. I voraciously absorb digital information, which is probably not good, So I am a scroller. Unfortunately,
it's hard to avoid, isn't it? I mean, it's just constantly bombarding you, and it is difficult to turn away from that sometimes.
And I love LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a brilliant learning
channel. It's great tool.
People don't realize what an excellent learning channel LinkedIn is, and I don't mean the official learning things that they put out. I just mean like there's some fantastic content on LinkedIn. Fantastic content.
There is. Some people post some very helpful information. So I'd agree with that. But look, thanks for sharing that learning style. And it is interesting. And I suppose you also touched on something else that I want to just maybe just pause on for a minute, because as I get older, and as people move through their life journey, other things become prioritized, whether it's eating the apples, going for the walk. And I wanted to ask you about that, working for yourself, running your own company, because sometimes you have to be very mindful of boundaries and looking after yourself and making sure that you allocate time. Like, how do you deal with that? Is that no problem to you, or can you find yourself trying to burn the candle at both ends?
I think it depends on the sort of business that you run. I'm not trying to build. I'm not trying to be a master of industry. I'm not trying to build a big agency or a big corporation. I'm kind of a little bit altruistic. I know how much money I need to take to have that certain standard of living, and I'm a little bit selfish in making sure that I have the work-life balance, if that makes sense, from a point of view of and sometimes life will throw you curveballs that will force you to refocus on that, so to speak. But I think there is a piece of I have a space at home that I can work in. What I love about being self-employed is that I call the shots. So I will have periods where I have to work very intensely because I have a lot on. But if I need to take 3 weeks to go and do something, I can do that. I just adjust my calendar accordingly, and that is the great benefit of being self-employed. So I think there's a piece in that. I think I have a few routines. I think if you're self-employed and you're a solopreneur, so I have lots of people that work with me, but they're mainly agency or contract that come in and work with me. But when you're self-employed, it's really important that you surround yourself with really good people, and that probably it's life advice is be careful who are the 3 or 4 people you spend the most time with, because they're a reflection of you, or you will become a reflection of them, so to speak. So I think that if you have good people around you that will challenge you and kick your ass occasionally, and but also warn you when that balance is off, I think that's important.
No, thanks, Miriam. And it is interesting that in today's new way of working, maybe if I can use that phrase, that you can work in this sort of new way where you've got people that you can work with, pull in, use at various times. You build up this community, and as you say, that there's a pressure that comes with that sometimes, because you have to make sure, as you say, that you pull in enough money at the right times. But there's also a great freedom in that, in terms of being able to set your own hours, do your own thing. Or I was talking to an author recently who said that what they really love about what they do is they can set their own hours, and they can make their business work around their life, as opposed to having to always put the business first, So it is interesting. And that leads me on to something else now, when you're talking about people that you work with and things like that. If I throw the question at you, when you look back at your life, your career to date, now this could be right back to your childhood days or your early days. It could be family, it could be people in business. But when I ask you who's inspired you along your journey, who do you admire? What springs to mind when I sort of talk about, people that inspire you or people that you admire?
That's actually a really hard question, because there are probably about 1,000 people that I'd want to say. I think that, so if my dad, actually, so my dad was quite a, he was only at school till he was 12. His best subject was spelling. He worked hard all his life, but he was a very kind man. And I'm getting a bit emotional talking about it. He was a very kind man, and he was very we were lucky enough. I was lucky enough to still have my dad until not that long ago. He passed away last year, but and actually part of the joy of being self-employed was that I was able to be with him and spend a lot of time with him towards the end, and that was an absolute gift. But I never heard him say bad things about anybody in the 50 years of my life that I knew him. And he was very he was a very kind man, and he didn't have a very easy life, but he had a really good life. And his favorite movie was It's a Wonderful Life, and he's probably the best reflection of that I can imagine, because he was so loved. I'm actually getting a bit emotional. The sheer people that turned up at this man's funeral, and he didn't do anything fantastic, and by modern commercial standards, except to be an extraordinarily kind human. And myself and my husband have worked very hard with our children to bestow those values. That So anybody who's kind and generous of spirit would be somebody I would admire. From a business point of view, there was a chap I worked with when I was with the Burton Group. They bought Hawkshead and Racing Green, and this was just before Philip Green got his greedy hands on the business and turned it into Arcadia. And I was known as a bit of a troubleshooter, so they'd pulled me into Racing Green, and there was this really incredibly difficult, short Scouse fella called Paul Clark, who was the chief executive of those two brands. And when I say he was difficult, I loved him. He was straight shooting. He took no shit, so to speak, pardon the language, but he was exceptionally clever and exceptionally far-sighted, and had huge ethics and personal integrity. So for me, and he's just one example of a lot of people that I've met. Shane is another one, Shane Craddock, that I mentioned. Janetta van Leeuwen, who's a really good friend of mine, Dutch lady, my one of my besties. She's another person who I hugely admire. Like I probably would take hours to list to you all of the people I admire, but the thing that they have in common usually is very strong core value system, if that makes sense, which is more important than the money, if you know what I mean. And they're usually people that have got great kindness and have generosity of spirit. But actually, my father, first and foremost, I was very lucky to have such a great man in my life.
Yeah. Well, I obviously, I'm sorry to hear about the passing of your father. It's always a difficult time to lose a parent. And just what you said there, the kindness of somebody as a human quality is so important.
It's underrated.
It is so underrated.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And do you know what I loved what you said about your father? That he's his sort of educational experience, he was great at spelling. I love that. At 12 years of age he left school, and to be so kind. And I've been fortunate to have a family member in my immediate family who sounds very similar, where they've been so kind. I've never heard them say a bad word, and you were talking about your father like that. And that's just such a great quality. And it's only, I think, as I get older in life that I realize how important that kindness is, and the honesty and the integrity. And you talked a little bit about people with sort of like they stick to their sort of principles and their integrity, and they're two great qualities that you've mentioned there. So thank you so much for sharing that with me.
They get lost a little bit. I think there is a disconnect, and maybe social media is a little bit responsible for this, because we all talk about the hustle, and the hustle, and I do see lots of people who feel that the hustle is all important, and they mistake what that means, if that makes sense. They mistake what that means, and unfortunately that can drive a bit of a ruthlessness, which isn't actually very healthy. I think kindness in business actually garners better results, and I've absolutely experienced that. So I think kindness in business is very important, and that doesn't mean being soft at all.
Well, you mentioned some really great retail gurus, if I can use that term, as we've been talking, and then you also mentioned Philip Green. And if you're talking about the style of Philip Green compared to the style of another retailer, that's really when you look at the qualities of a person, and you look at the differences of a person, how they operate.
I left the Burton Group when it became Arcadia. That's when I sought to move, and I remember, if I take Racing Green, was a brand that they had bought, and there was a mindset there. So Racing Green was actually quite a preppy brand. It was really good quality stuff, and it was all European made. It was, you'd pay 100 quid for a shirt out of Racing Green, but they would have paid 35 quid to make that shirt. So you were getting a really premium product. And when that became part of Arcadia, there was this, no, we'll buy the shirt for 2 quid, or we'll buy them for a tenner. But there was a disconnect that, you can buy a shirt for 2 quid and sell it for a tenner, or you can buy a shirt for 30 quid and sell it for 100. There was a disconnect there, which
different set of values, different set of beliefs.
Yeah, it was a bit barrow boy-y, if that makes sense. It was a bit too, the customer was not at the center of it. It wasn't about the quality of the product. It was about the cheapest price and pilot high, and so I've heard plenty of stories. So
there's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yeah. No, so that's great, Miriam. And I suppose then, when we've talked about people you admire, and you're very kind to share about your father and people in business. But when I ask you about maybe another sort of question that builds on that, which is about advice. Now, obviously, you spend a lot of time sharing your expertise, your your retail expertise across many different sectors in today's world. But when you think, and I say to you, well, has anybody ever told you anything, or is there any advice that you've been given? I know you've mentioned a little bit about sort of the person that helped you from a coaching perspective and some of the key retailers who've helped you along the way. But is there any advice that stands out to you that's sort of proven the test of time that you got, you know what, I wish I'd have known that sooner? Or is there any advice that you find yourself constantly repeating to people because you think it's just so important that you share the message?
Do you know, there's two. One is kind of a business one, and one is a life one. The life one was my dad, and I remember when I was young and really ambitious, and I was determined to get to here, and then yourself, you get to that level, and then that's not good enough. You want to get to the you want to get to the next level. And I would be very intense about everything, and the amount of energy I wasted worrying about things. And my dad used to say to me, like, worry is such a waste of your energy. You're actually hurting yourself by doing it. Why would you be bothered worrying? And that was really good advice. And unfortunately, it took me too long to understand it properly. It only really came with maturity that I got how good that advice was, if that makes sense. So that's a little bit of life advice, that worry is an absolute waste of everybody's time and energy, and you might as well just get on with it, because most things tend to work out. And even the really bad stuff, although when you're in it, it's really bad, it tends to work out in the end. So worry is a waste of energy would be life advice. It's nothing remarkable there. And then the business one that I say a lot, which sounds kind of weird, is they always put a currant in the other man's bun. And that goes back to my early days in the Burton Group. And John Horner would give this advice to any new management that were joining the business. And the simplicity of that is, if you want to do, human beings are inherently, unfortunately, I'm talking about kindness, but human beings are inherently selfish creatures. We are selfish animals. So if you want somebody to do something for you, you need to approach it from a what's in it from them point of view. And this is advice that I tend to give a lot, because, when I see people who are raising funds, young innovators who are trying to raise funds for their new venture, and they're pitching it totally from their own point of view, because it's like their baby and their project. I have to remind them, no, nobody cares. You need to be pitching this from the point of view of who you want to give the money to. So they always put a currant in the other man's bun. Might be a weird saying, but it's probably a highly valuable business advice saying, because whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you need to think about it from the perspective of the other person and approach it that way if you want to be successful. So
I love both of those. I think they're you sort of said the first one was simple, but I think it's probably more important now than ever, particularly, a lot of people worried, a lot of people anxious. There's a lot of people struggling, and I think that's a really important one. And always put a current in the other man's bun.
It's a terrible sentence, but it's really valuable.
But it works.
It
works. So thanks for that. That's great advice. That will stay with me, just so as you know. I like that. When we are thinking about the year ahead, you're in a different position. You're looking at things maybe differently. Maybe you've had a little bit of time to reflect on, what you're trying to achieve over the next 6 to 12 months. But when I ask you that question, I say, well, what's taking up your mental capacity? What are you focused on? What are you going to be thinking about as we go forward over the next sort of 12 months or so?
I think we're in a situation where we're in a very fast changing world at the moment. So, 2 years ago we were talking about everybody needs to get online, and now being online is the absolute bog standard you need to be in business. It's really just the very beginning. So what we're going to see is a lot of, and I'm going a bit retail-y here, we're going to see a lot of innovation that makes the online experience softer and less transactional and less like being online. So, and we already in the last 18 months have started to see lots of artificial intelligence bolt-ons and virtual reality and augmented reality bolt-ons. And so I think that's going to ramp up in the next year. I think the whole, you know, we're already hearing all the furor about Chat GPT and the, you know, AI online, which is really terrifying. Like, I talk about technology. I'm rubbish at technology, but I talk about I know what needs to be done. I'm just not the person to do the technology bits, you know. So that's actually gaining a lot more speed now. So we are in the middle of an industrial revolution at the moment. So we are now in the digital age, and it's going to start moving really quickly. So the one constant thing about this year is going to be change. So it's going to be change, and it's about approaching that in the right way. So approach it with interest and with you know, curiosity, and look to see where there's going to be opportunity. And you know, I think anybody who knows me well will tell you that I am living proof that you do not need to be technically good to be future focused, you know. So you know, I've one kiddie is now 6'5" and at university, and the other kiddie is about to start high school. So I think there's a little bit about grabbing any bit of joy with both hands, and also the last bit of the child in the younger one before she goes all grunty and mean, and as they do when they hit the teens. And so there's a little bit of that, but actually a bit of an upskill. I see a little bit of a personal upskill coming for me this year from a digital point of view. So.
But look, you've covered a lot of bases there, and I'm going to just mention Chat GPT for a second. I'm not going to go into it because everybody's talking about it. But I wanted to maybe just make the comment that it feels like there's a step change coming, and I'm fascinated by what the line that you said about you think there's going to be a softening around it as sort of the next evolution. And that's very interesting because, you know, whether it's the metaverse, the blockchain, Chat GPT 3, 4's coming, you think you've seen something yet, wait till you see the next stage. Yeah. But you're one of the few people that's actually related that to an actual experience or a feeling or an emotional connection with a human, which is, it's actually going to soften it a little bit. It's going to make it more pleasurable. It's going to make it more seamless, more efficient, more relatable, you know. And I think that's a very interesting point, because whether it's the founder raising lots of money and getting excited about his or her own story, or whether it's somebody getting carried away with the technology and being frightened to death by it or really enthused by it, what you're able to do is to say, well, actually, here's how I think it's going to change things. Here's the feeling that here's how it's going to actually weave itself into our lives.
Yeah, and actually that's kind of sums up what I do. I take complicated things and explain them in English so that normal people can understand them. That's actually a summary of what I do. There is a piece here where, so if you remember, like I remember having a computer and we thought we were so cutting edge, and the computer was like the size of a washing machine, and all we did was play solitaire on it, and we'd have to dial in, and do you remember that awful noise, and you'd have to dial, and it'd take you half an hour to get dialed up to the internet to play bloody solitaire. So look at how fast it's already moving. There's an element here where our children are already there. So if you look at, you know, the games they're playing and the forums that they're in, they're already growing up in this digital world. And so what I mean by softening is, like, there's a lot of terminology that's being used that actually would be quite alarming, and it would scare the Luddards like me. It would scare us and go, oh my God, this is not the world that, you know, we're all going to be plugged into the matrix or whatever. But actually, all it is a coming together of technologies that have been slowly evolving, and they're just slowly beginning to join up a bit. So there's two things happening. That's happening. So like, some of us have those doorbells where it doesn't matter where you are, you can see the person coming to the door and talk to them. So there's going to be a bit of that joining up with the, how you can pay digitally, joining up with, where you are, so that you can use virtual reality. So there's lots of this technology is going to join up, and it's going to happen quite more naturally than you would expect. So it's going to happen reasonably quickly. But then at the same time as that, online, and if I go back to retail, the transactional function of going online to buy something isn't satisfactory now for us as humans. We don't like that experience. It's not a pleasant experience. It's too functional. It's not sexy. It's not enjoyable. So we're already seeing lots of fantastic innovation out there where and I'm not talking about chatbots and stuff like that. I'm actually talking about really clever artificial intelligence tools. And this is not a debate about whether artificial intelligence is good or not, because that's a whole other show. But there's lots of things out there on the market, and they're accessible for even the smallest of retailers. Where the experience is beginning to feel a lot more soft. So where you go on and it will have curated stuff that actually is attractive to you, and it will help you, not from a hard sell point of view, but from a point of view of giving you a more sales assistant service. So we're going to see lots of that softening of digital business happening. And then likewise, we're seeing all of the lines between commerce and media are really blurring now. So, you're going to be watching Netflix and you can be shopping at the same time. You're going, it's all kind of coming together. And this is, I think, people get caught up in terms like metaverse, but actually all it is all of this technology is going to slowly and start to, the seams are going to come together a little bit. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think it just means that you're going to be more in demand than ever, Miriam, to figure all that out for these retailers and these companies and industry sectors. But it's interesting,
it's more
because
accessible than people think. Actually, it really.
Yeah, but it is so refreshing to hear somebody talking about that coming together of technologies and the softening of technologies, because that's not a conversation you hear very often. It gets very caught up very quickly in the technology discussion.
Yeah, well, I can tell you,
fear or excitement. But you're coming at it from a completely different sort of lens, or an additional lens, maybe, is a better way of saying that.
I think there is there's a lot of the language around it is quite often not ideal in helping it along. So, but then there's this whole other, there is a generational piece here also, to be fair, there is a generational piece here where our children are growing up with a lot of this as normal, whereas we are, they say once you're over a certain age to adapt is a lot harder, but we are in an industrial revolution at the moment. That we categorically are.
Yeah, fundamentally, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So look, there's only two things I want to ask you now, Miriam, as we sort of come towards the end of our time here together on this episode. It's been fascinating talking to you. First of all, I want to ask you if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that you're involved in or that you're thinking about that you want to share with our international audience. And the second thing is, if people want to find out more about the sort of services that you offer, the work that you do, the books that you've written, the speaking that you're engaged in, where are you sending people to these days? Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
So probably the website, which is just miriamsimon.ie, or you can find me on LinkedIn, or I'm more recently trying to get down with kids. I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to think. I think I'm miriamsimon.ie on Instagram as well. But primarily miriamsimon.ie is where you'll find me. I did the whole zhuzh and rebrand last year. So yeah, you'll find me there. The Retail Powerhouse is It's a small subscription group, and that's for you have to be under 1 million turnover. That's for the small guys, and it's a really nice community. We do masterclasses every month, and we do group sessions every month, and that's really about giving the smaller retailer access to actually quite expensive consultancy that they wouldn't get one-to-one otherwise. But it's a fantastic community, and there's some really exciting retailers up and coming in Ireland at the moment. Some really exciting retailers. So yeah.
Well, that's great. That's covered both of those answers. So there's some places that people can go and check out and find out, and obviously there's the community that you grow in there. But miriamsimon.ie, just for our international audience, it's a .ie rather than a .com, and you'll find everything that Miriam's involved in there.
Yeah, just look for the specs, big specs on the.
Very good. Well, Miriam, that brings us nicely to the end of today's episode on the Global Discussion. I want to thank Miriam for joining me here today, and thank everybody for watching and listening to this episode of the Global Discussion. Make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe, all the normal things that you do with the podcast. We'd certainly appreciate it. And I hope you'll join me back here again for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So all that remains is for me to say, Miriam, thank you. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you again. And it's always good to hear your insights and your expertise. So thank you so much for being a guest on the Global Discussion, Miriam.
Oh, no, thank you. And really enjoyed the chats. Thank you ever so much, Simon.
Thanks, Miriam.